The Summer Olympics don't get started for another couple weeks, but the Edmonton Oilers are already doing quite a bit of gymnastics.
You are Locked On Oilers, your daily podcast on the Edmonton Oilers, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's edition of Locked On Oilers. I am your host, Nick Zararis. I want to thank everybody who makes Locked On Oilers their first listen of the day. Locked On Oilers, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. As the playoffs are over, the sports stop sporting like we want them to, but this summer, FanDuel is hooking up all customers with a boost or bonus daily. That's right. There's something for everyone every day, all summer long. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. So, today's episode, very straightforward. We're going to talk about the Edmonton Oilers salary cap situation. We're going to talk about the Ryan McLeod for Matthew Savoie trade. We're going to talk about the Evander Kane LTIR conundrum. And then we're going to talk about how the Oilers are going to probably handle Evan Bouchard, Phillip, Broberg, and Dylan Holloway. So, let's get right to it. When I saw that trade on Friday evening, I was going to Yankees Red Sox. I was standing at the bar with my friends, and I saw the tweet. I saw a few different reporters tweet the Ryan McLeod for Matthew Savoie trade, and I was like, Savoie, that sounds familiar. He was a reasonably high first round pick. I Googled him, former 9th overall pick, and in the abstract, just conceptually, for the Oilers to get a prospect with upside and what's effectively a salary dump trade is a win. Whether or not Savoie ever actually becomes anything of note in the NHL is besides the point. The process here is good. Ryan McLeod's a good player. I don't want this to be construed as the Oilers were just shedding dead weight. They needed to clear cap space, and they still do. That's why the second segment and third segments of today's episode are what they're going to be. The Oilers are kind of in a pickle when it comes to their money. So losing a player like Ryan McLeod stinks. He is your ideal modern day bottom six forward who can occasionally in a pinch inch up into your top six. The high end speed, that's the main reason Buffalo prioritized him. They've spent pretty much all of their free agency and trades this offseason focused on getting faster in their bottom six, bringing in a guy like McLeod. They brought in Obe Kubel. And they brought in another few guys who are all 90 plus percentile skaters in the NHL for top end speed, trying to get more functional, trying to find ways to improve their roster on the margins so that their stars don't have to do as much work. And I do think the Oilers are going to miss Ryan McLeod. McLeod's skill set is really good for a bottom six forward. You know, I saw a lot of prospect people jokingly say this is, Phillip Forsberg for Martin Erat 2.0. And then somebody else said, well, no, this is more like Carl Hagelin for Phillip Forsberg. And I really like McLeod's game. I think he's going to do well in Buffalo. I think there's an opportunity there for him to maybe get into that team's top six as opposed to just being a third line center. And this does create a lineup conundrum for the Oilers, whether or not they want to play Henrique on the first line on the left wing of McDavid and with Hyman, where he had played really well in the playoffs in spurts, or if Henrique is going to be the straight McLeod replacement in terms of the depth chart, he's going to be the third line center. Then they got to figure out what they're going to do with the top six. But abstractly, the Oilers did well here. I like the idea of trying to get younger with upside. Too many teams are just content to throw things away. And Savoie did not have a clear path to the top six for the Sabres, and he doesn't have one here in Edmonton, at least not at the outset. Maybe he has a strong training camp or a strong preseason and he plays his way onto the team. But more likely than not, this is somebody who's going to need more tinkering. He's coming off a pretty strong season in the WHL, where he was a 2-point per game player. His team won the WHL championship this past season. But one thing in my research about Savoie and his game is that he was more of a supporting role guy on the Canadian World Junior team, and somebody who maybe, probably because he doesn't have the high-end puck instincts or hockey sense, if you will, he's probably never going to really be able to utilize his skill set to the max. He's a pretty good skater. He's got a really good shot. So that's the argument for this type of player. He's a little bit undersized. He's not going to be an elite forechecker, but he's not a liability defensively. He is still an emerging prospect. He is still a developing piece. And that alone is something you should be happy about, that the Oilers prioritized not just getting rid of, some money. They prioritized finding a trade that worked for them and gave them the opportunity to get better. Again, whether or not Savoie ever actually becomes an impact NHL player or not, there's no way to know until it happens. And that's why I don't like assessing trades right when they happen, or even a year or 2 years out, especially for somebody who's a prospect. There's equally chances of Savoie being a 30-goal guy in the AHL in Bakersfield for a couple years and never really making it to the league. And then there's a world where he's probably a 40 to 50-point guy in the middle six on a good Oilers team. So until he gets into Edmonton, until he gets a feel for the organization and the organization gets a feel for him, because this is something I talk about all the time. Players are talented. To get to the NHL, to be in consideration to even play in the NHL like Savoie, you have to have a lot of talent. Savoie may not translate to what the Oilers want from a specific role, and it may be hard for him to crack the team because his skill set profiles as a top six forward, but he doesn't really have the inherent feel for the game that you're going to need from your high-end guys, and that might keep him from ever being a top six player. And somebody who's undersized, who's offense first, they generally have a hard time sticking on the third line, and it's why Savoie's not in Buffalo. The Sabres, they will do anything to try and make the playoffs. And somebody like Savoie, you pick somebody 9th overall, to move on from them in less than 2 years is kind of crazy. And objectively, just to move on from someone that quickly for somebody with not a ton of upside. And look, I like Ryan McLeod a lot. I like the trade for Buffalo because I see what they're trying to do. But he's not of the caliber of player that Savoie could be. And that's what we're dealing with here. We're talking about probabilities and possibilities. I think there's a world where Savoie can be a very solid NHL regular, have a little bit of offensive upside to his game, and that keeps him in the league. There are plenty of undersized guys who have good puck skills who never really pan out for whatever reason. And some of it is that coaches don't really trust them. Some of it is that their game just isn't suited to the speed and the rigor of the NHL. The rink is the same size, but it feels a lot smaller at the NHL level because guys make decisions faster. And that's why, all the scouting reports on Savoie who wrote up his season last year, they're very astute to the fact he doesn't process the game that quickly at the WHL level, because the AHL and the NHL are going to be even faster than that. So it's definitely something to keep in mind as far as the evaluation. The Oilers are in a position now where they're going to need to get creative. This is a sign of creativity. And I jokingly said, are we sure Jeff Jackson needs to hire an interim GM? Because this is a slam dunk move, and he's really hammered the trade market and free agency very well so far on his limited run as interim GM. But there is a plan here. The Oilers are getting younger. They're getting more. They are getting upside, and they are getting cheaper. The Oilers need to get cheaper. That's their biggest goal, and why coming up next, we're going to talk about how the Oilers could go about handling Evander Kane this upcoming season. So be sure to stick around to this edition of Locked On Oilers, where we've got your team covered every day. It's summer. That means the sports options, they're kind of winding down. We've got Major League Baseball and we've got the WNBA. I love sports. I love them so much. I never want them to stop. But as the playoffs are over now, we get fewer things to watch. And the sports aren't sportsing like I want them to. But FanDuel lets me keep the sports going whenever I want. All I have to do is open the app and dream up bets anytime I am in the mood. And this summer, FanDuel is hooking up all customers with a booster bonus daily. That's right. There's something for everyone every day, all summer long. Friday, you heard me. I was talking. I went to Yankees Red Sox. As is tradition, whenever I go to a game with my friends, we all like to throw a little something on the over. So that way we get to root for both teams. We get to root for points or goals or runs in the case of baseball. And it makes watching the game a little bit more fun. We pushed, unfortunately. The over-under was 8, and the game finished on exactly 8. So head on over to FanDuel.com and start making the most out of your summer. FanDuel, official sports betting partner of Major League Baseball. Thank you to everybody who's listening to this Monday edition of Locked On Oilers. Coming out a little later than usual on Monday. Long holiday weekend, very busy, very tiring. So didn't get a chance to record, typically going into the next day. So you'll watch this probably within a few hours of it going live. Next up on the laundry list of things the Oilers need to figure out, Evander Kane. Now, we talked about this briefly last week, that the Oilers are going to be hard-pressed to move Evander Kane, especially if he has no interest in moving. And it is entirely fair for you as an Oiler fan who cares about the team to say, well, I don't care. Unfortunately, the NHL and general managers in this league, they give out no movement clauses very, very liberally. There, in the other sports, it is really hard to get a no trade clause. In baseball, it's related to service time. You need to play X number of seasons. In basketball, they just don't get given out. And then in football, that's not really a thing either. So hockey general managers give out no movement clauses as a means of incentivizing a contract because they can't offer as much cap, as high an average annual value salary, or as much term as they would like. They offer the no movement clause as a mitigation factor of, I know you would like more money, but we can give you this as a means of saying, we want you to be here. And often, as is the case in these situations, it becomes the burden of the next general manager. You know, we talked about that in regards to free agency last week, and that the Oilers did a nice job of not tying up money in future years in free agency on guys who didn't really fit the long-term vision. The Oilers couldn't give Evander Kane probably what he was asking for in terms of money per season when they signed him to that extension after bringing him in after the Sharks bought him out. Or, excuse me, the Sharks voided his contract. But you get what I'm saying. The Oilers, to incentivize Evander Kane to take a contract that was lower AAV, gave him a no movement clause. And this is not a no trade like some other players where they submit a list. This is full no movement. If Evander Kane does not want to go anywhere until his contract changes from no movement to no trade with a limited list, which happens in March 5th, 2025, until that happens, the Oilers do not have a choice. Unless Evander Kane wants to go, he does not have to go. And that puts the Oilers in a pickle because Evander Kane's making about $5 million per season. They need that money. Right now, as we sit here recording this on Monday, July 8th, about 10 a.m., the Oilers need more cap space. They are still over the cap. Trading Ryan McLeod for Matthew Savoie does not entirely solve their problem. They still need to sign Evan Bouchard, Phillip Broberg, and Dylan Holloway, who we're going to talk about in the third segment of today's show. And they can't do that right now because they are still over the cap. They do have recourse. I assume they are going to try and trade Cody Ceci or Brett Kulak. They probably don't need to trade both, but the problem the Oilers are going to run into is that they need to figure out how to get Broberg, Bouchard, and Holloway all under contract. And, you know, I don't want to step on the next segment, so I'm going to pivot back to Evander Kane. The options are limited here. Now, there is a bit of conjecture going on right now that the Oilers may put Evander Kane on long-term injured reserve to begin next season. That is a temporary fix. If they put Evander Kane on LTIR to start the season, he will eventually be ready to play again. If he is dealing with a sports hernia, as reported, that's usually a 4 or 5 months recovery period. He still has yet to get surgery, so if he were to do it, whenever he would do it, you could expect a return 4 to 5 months from now. Now, I'm not saying the Oilers are going to encourage him to get surgery, in October, so he can come back after the trade deadline and they can perform some cap shenanigans. I am not saying the Oilers are going to encourage Evander Kane to delay getting surgery to manipulate the salary cap. I am saying, as of right now, he has yet to get surgery. Whenever he does ultimately get surgery, if that is the case, there's a very good chance he could just choose to rehab it and try and be ready for the start of the regular season through non-surgical means. That will put the Oilers in quite the bind. He has a full no movement clause. It is not as simple as, oh, we're going to trade you. The problem is also the teams that are going to take a player like Evander Kane, the Ducks, maybe the Blackhawks. These teams that are pretty poor, that are not good. He is not going to leave a team that went to Game 7 of the Stanley Cup Final to get more playing time on the Ducks. Evander Kane very clearly wanted to go to a landing spot where he was going to have a chance to win, so I picked Edmonton over some of the other possibilities when the Sharks had voided his contract. And the Oilers put him in a position where they gave him a contract that was probably both a little too long and gave him a little too much protection because they could not afford to give him the AAV he probably wanted. Now, if they had let Evander Kane go to market, there's probably a chance he would have ended up with a lesser contract. I don't know how many teams in the league were interested in bringing in Evander Kane based on the reputation issues, based on how things had played out in San Jose. So that, when stuff like that happens, you have to take the information as it comes to you. And I can't speak authoritatively on this situation because the Oilers don't have a defined solution yet. They don't know what's going to happen here as far as Evander Kane. I don't know if the Oilers are going to try and pull some cap chicanery. The Lightning have done this. The Golden Knights, of course, have done this. And the Blackhawks did this once upon a time. The Blackhawks were the original purveyors of this chicanery when they sat Patrick Kane out the last 3 months of the regular season. He came back for game 1 of the playoffs against the Predators. He scored a goal, and they went on to win the Stanley Cup back in 2015. The Lightning did this in 2019. Kucherov came back for the playoffs. And then the Golden Knights did this last year, and they did this with Mark Stone this past year as well, where they set up guys to come back from LTIR right at the start of the playoffs to put themselves in a position where they can add at the deadline and then bring a player back into the team, because the players don't get paid in the playoffs. There is no salary cap. So because of that, you are in a position where if you are the Oilers, you are being incentivized by the league to manipulate long-term injured reserve, and that's unfair. I can't speak authoritatively on these topics because we don't know. Teams are very obtuse in the NHL about injuries, the recovery process, and all of that because it behooves them to manipulate those process. If you can get Evander Kane off of your books for 3 months, fill out your roster, and then kick the can down the road and deal with this in December, January, February, okay, that's something I could see the Oilers doing. But if he doesn't get surgery, he's not going to agree to get traded to a bad team. He may not get he might not agree to get traded to any team, let alone a bad team. The Oilers don't have a choice until March 5th of next year, when his contract status changes, where it goes from full no movement to a limited no trade, where he submits a list. The Oilers do not have a recourse. You can drag your feet, you can kvetch, unless the Oilers want to waive him to buy him out and maybe someone claims him, or buy him out. They don't have a choice. The Oilers are going to need to get creative here to come up with some more cap space, because you don't want to subtract somebody who's actually impactful from this team. So we're going to take one more quick break. We're going to come back. We're going to talk about Holloway, Bouchard, and Broberg. So be sure to stick around to this edition of Locked On Oilers, where we've got your team covered every day. Thank you to everybody who is making time for Locked On Oilers on this July Monday. I know, down here in the States, very tiring, cumbersome weekend. I know last week, Canada Day fell on a Monday, so nice 3-day weekend up there. I am tired, friends. I had myself quite the fun weekend. Like I said, went to Yankees, Red Sox, got in there. Saturday was a lot of fun as well. I celebrated one of my friend's birthdays. We went to karaoke. But man, the tired, it comes for you. It's different when you get to your late 20s, where I'm still tired from Saturday into today, and I probably won't feel normal until about Wednesday. So with that Evander Kane topic in mind, the Oilers have a few recourses here. One thing they can do, and something I've seen people say, they could play with a bare bones roster where they won't have a 13th forward, they won't have a 7th defenseman. That's something that might be on the table for right now. And that might be something they have to do even if they put Patrick Kane, Evander Kane, on long-term injured reserve. The problem for Dylan Holloway and Phillip Broberg, and for them, not the Oilers, is that neither of them have arbitration rights. So when you sign that entry-level contract, that first contract, that 3-year deal when you get drafted and you come to the league, you don't get arbitration rights until the next one. That's where Evan Bouchard is right now. Evan Bouchard can make this difficult for the Oilers if he wants to. I'm not saying he's going to, but there is a world where Evan Bouchard could choose to make things difficult for the Oilers if that contract process gets played out. He can argue, I deserve this. The Oilers can argue he deserves that. And they go back and forth. Broberg and Holloway, they're SOL. They get their qualifying offer, and that's all they get. The only option they have is to refuse to report. And neither guy's going to do that. You refuse to report, you'll get suspended without pay. There is not really a great solution to that because this is the way the contracts are set up. The NHL wants it this way. The Players Association has prioritized the older, more expensive guys the entire time post 2005 lockout. It is why there are all these protections. It's why there are the over 35 bonuses. They have put so many protections for the highest earners in the Players Association because those are the people who have roles on the executive committee of the Players Association. And that is their right as a labor group. They negotiate what they want through collective bargaining. And because of that, this is where we're at. These young guys just have to eat it. They don't have a choice. And Bouchard is in a different boat because, like I said, he's arbitration eligible. So that situation can get played out. I had read the other day in The Athletic that the Oilers probably won't be able to go log on Bouchard yet because they need to take care of Draisaitl first. Once they get Draisaitl figured out, then maybe there's a world where they could figure out Bouchard too. But that probably won't come until next season or the season after that, depending on the bridge deal he's able to work out. The Oilers are going to pay for previous cap mishaps. And that's the way the salary cap comes around. If you're a really good team, like the Lightning, you get a slow brain drain. You lose guys like Ross Colton, Andre Palat, Alex Killorn, Blake Coleman, Barclay Goodrow, Yanni Gourde. You lose talented players through the salary cap because eventually there comes a point where you can't have good depth anymore because your good depth is underpaid because, it's on restricted free agent contracts, or you acquire them from a team and you have the last bit of their restricted free agent years. Until you get those guys, find a way to replace those guys on the, entry level or restricted free agent deals, you have a brain drain. You lose talented players and you just have to eat it. There's no recourse. You can't answer the salary cap because you can't go over the salary cap. Now, the opposite end of that is when you make mistakes in the salary cap, like the Oilers have, overpaying Darnell Nurse, overpaying Evander Kane, buying out Jack Campbell, buying out James Neal, you have to figure out ways to make cap space to keep the good players you have so you can just keep what you already have as opposed to avoiding losing what you have. And now you're watching it in real time. The Oilers are trying to blend that McDavid, Draisaitl group with younger guys, with, Bouchard and Holloway and the aforementioned Matthew Savoie and Phillip Broberg. And that's the goal. You want to blend your best of the best, McDavid, Draisaitl, Hyman, Nugent-Hopkins, Ekholm, with a wave of younger guys because those younger guys are a lot less expensive. The stars are the model. And we talked about this last week when we were talking about a Draisaitl contract, that it's not easy to compare the Stars to the Oilers situations because the Stars guys are getting like $9.5, $10 million a year, whereas McDavid's getting $12.5 and Draisaitl's probably going to get at least $13 million a year. And that's, $5 million more total than Sagan and Ben. But the Stars were able to get a Rope Hintz, a Jason Robertson, not Mason Marchment, a Wyatt Johnston. That's who I was thinking of. Excuse me, a Thomas Harley. Until you start integrating young guys for cheap, it's hard to maintain. You hope, if you're an Oilers fan listening to this, that Evan Bouchard, he's your Miro Heiskanen. The Stars had to take care of Miro Heiskanen. You're hoping Phillip Broberg can be your Thomas Harley. You are hoping Dylan Holloway can be close to Wyatt Johnston. You are hoping Matthew Savoie can be, your Logan Stankoven or whoever you want to compare him to, because you need to keep those young guys in your team because they're cheap. You need cheap talent. And in the NHL, that typically means you're a young guy or you're not very good. Those are your two options when you're filling out your bottom six as a good team. Because if you're a good team, you're most likely spending close to the cap. Because if you're a good team, you probably have at least 2 or 3 star players. And because of the way the salary cap is set up, star players command an outsized amount of the salary cap rather intentionally. You need to find ways to improve your roster. And the Oilers are going to find a way to make this work with Broberg and Bouchard and with Holloway. But they have to figure out a solution. Maybe it is simple as Evander Kane, you're going to get back surgery in August, so you can sit out 4 months, and then we'll figure this out closer to the trade deadline. Or maybe it's as simple as, okay, we have to trade Cody Ceci or Brett Kulak, or maybe we can find a way to convince Evander Kane to get traded. The Oilers do have options, but they do have to make one eventually. They cannot currently sustain what they have if Evander Kane is going to play on opening night. Until we get clarity on what the process of him trying to recover from that injury is going to be, it's going to be a little bit harder to predict where the Oilers are going, but that will just about do it for this Monday edition of Locked On Oilers. So I hate to be a burden. Could you please be so kind? Subscribe to the show wherever you get your podcast. If you're listening on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, please take an extra second, leave the show a 5-star review. If you are watching over on YouTube, hit the subscribe button, hit the alarm bell. Leave me a comment. Let me know. Do you think Evander Kane is going to be on the Oilers opening night next season? I'll talk to you guys tomorrow. Until then, let's go Oilers.